planting explosives in movie theaters, train stations, the New York Public Library. Planting explosives in movie theaters, train stations, the New York Public Library. And for 16 years, the police had nothing. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no leads. So in 1956, out of options, they tried something that had never really been tried before. They asked a psychiatrist to guess what the bomber looked like. Not from a photograph, not from a confession, from his handwriting and the way he phrased his letters. What happened next didn't just catch a bomber. It created an entire field of criminal investigation still used today. On November 16, 1940, workers at a Consolidated Edison building found a homemade pipe bomb sitting on a windowsill. It hadn't gone off. Taped to it was a note. Con Edison crooks, this is for you. Over the next 16 years, a man the press called the Mad Bomber planted at least 33 devices across the city. Grand Central Terminal, Penn Station, Radio City Music Hall. Movie theater seats sliced open and restitched around a bomb inside. 22 exploded. 15 people were injured. Remarkably, nobody was killed. Every device was signed the same way. 2 letters, F.P. Nobody knew what they meant. Oddly, the bombing stopped completely for almost a decade. Right after Pearl Harbor, a letter arrived at a police station. The bomber wouldn't be planting any more devices for the duration of the war. His patriotic feelings wouldn't allow it. He kept that promise for 9 years. Then, in 1951, the bombs started again. By 1956, fingerprint experts, handwriting analysts, and the NYPD's entire bomb squad had gotten nowhere. So Police Captain John Cronin did something almost embarrassing for a detective to admit. He called a friend who wasn't a detective at all. James Brussel was a psychiatrist, assistant commissioner of the New York State Commission for Mental Hygiene, with a side history doing counterintelligence profiling for the Army in World War II and Korea. He'd never worked an active bombing case in his life. Inspector Howard Finney, who ran the crime lab, was openly skeptical. He handed Brussel the file, more or less to prove the idea was useless. Brussel had no suspect. He had letters, bomb fragment photos, and newspaper clippings. So he worked backward from the evidence itself. The old-fashioned phrasing in the letters, dastardly deeds, suggested someone who hadn't grown up speaking English. The obsessive, careful construction of the bombs suggested a paranoid personality. Methodical, controlled, convinced of a grievance nobody else could see. Piece by piece, he built a person. Male, middle-aged, meticulous to the point of fussiness, unmarried, likely living with an older female relative, a sister, not a wife. Eastern European background. Paranoid, but functional enough to hold a steady job without a single neighbor suspecting a thing. Then Brussel added one detail that had nothing to do with evidence at all. Just an instinct about the kind of man he was building. When they finally caught him, he said, he'd be wearing a double-breasted suit. Buttoned. Police published the profile. It generated hundreds of false leads and no arrest. What actually broke the case was far less dramatic. A Con Edison clerk named Alice Kelly, sorting through old employee grievance files, found a complaint from a former worker named George Metesky, injured on the job in 1931, still writing angry letters about it decades later. His phrasing echoed the bomber's letters almost exactly. On January 21, 1957, police showed up at Metesky's house in Waterbury, Connecticut in the middle of the night. He answered the door in pajamas and a robe. Middle-aged. Unmarried. Living with 2 older sisters. When they told him to get dressed for the station, he came back down the stairs in a double-breasted suit. Buttoned. He confessed on the spot and finally explained what FP stood for. Fair play. Metesky was diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic and committed rather than tried. 16 years in a hospital for the criminally insane. Almost exactly as long as he'd spent free planting bombs. He was released in 1973 and died quietly in 1994, at 90, in the same Connecticut town where he'd been arrested. Brussel's career went the opposite direction. The press started calling him things like the psychiatric seer. By the 1970s, he was being described as the founding father of an entirely new discipline, and FBI agents were studying his methods directly. Methods that would later get formalized into the Bureau's own criminal profiling units. His account of the case is still considered one of the field's founding texts. None of it was perfect. Brussel got details wrong on other cases, and said so himself afterward. The method wasn't magic. It was educated pattern matching, dressed up as intuition. But the core idea underneath still holds up. Behavior leaves a signature, the same way handwriting does, if you know how to read it. A stranger's actions can describe the stranger long before you ever learn their name. That's the strange thing about this case. The reason it worked isn't really about bombs at all. It's about how much of ourselves leaks into the way we act, whether we mean it to or not. That's exactly the kind of hidden system this channel exists to dig into. If you want to test that idea on yourself, tell me down in the comments. What's one thing about the way you write, or talk, or work that you think gives you away? I'll read every one. And if you want more cases like this, where the real story turns out to be about the mind, not just the crime. That's what happens here every week. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.